back thousands of years, to a time when there was no name called Iran, no kingdom, no city of stone and mortar. Only people, only humans who lived between the jagged ridges of the Zagros Mountains and the sun-scorched plains of ancient Anatolia, learning slowly, painfully, stubbornly, how to belong to this ancient and unforgiving land. In the Shanidar cave of northwestern Iran, archaeologists discovered the remains of Neanderthal humans who lived there at least 70,000 years ago. These earliest people did not yet know fire as a tool. They did not yet speak in words, but they lived. They struggled against the cold and the dark, and, perhaps most astonishing of all, they buried their dead. They placed flowers on the graves of those they had loved and lost. They mourned. They cared. In that single quiet act of grief, something extraordinary was born. The very beginning of humanity's greatest story. No one in those silent caves could have imagined where it would one day lead. Around 8,000 years ago, in the fertile lowlands between the rivers Karun and Simara, early farming communities began to take root. And it was hard, back-breaking, unforgiving work. But they did it anyway. These were people who had stopped merely chasing their food across the wilderness. They planted seeds in the earth. They harvested what grew. They stored grain for winters they hadn't yet seen. Life, slowly and stubbornly, began to expand. At a place called Choga-Mesh, in what is now Khuzestan province, one of the oldest cities on earth rose from the soil, a city with temples, marketplaces, and the first hints of social order. It was here, for the first time, that something resembling civilization took its first breath. Something that felt as if it was meant to last forever. Perhaps the most dazzling chapter of this ancient era belongs to the civilization of Elam. With its magnificent capital of Susa, Elam rose around 3,500 BCE and for more than 2,000 years stood as one of the most powerful civilizations in the entire Middle East. 2,000 years, a span of time almost impossible to truly feel. The Elamites had a written language. They had law. They had art. Their cylinder seals and soaring temples testify to a people who did not merely survive. They knew how to live. And there is a profound difference between those two things. Few people know that the world's oldest written legal code did not originate in Babylon, but from the soil of what is today Iran. And Susa, the city mentioned in the holy texts of multiple faiths, was for thousands of years one of the most populous and advanced cities on the face of the earth. Elam fought the Babylonians and the Assyrians across centuries of conflict. It won stunning victories and suffered crushing defeats. It never surrendered. In the end, it faded before the rising tide of Assyria and the new Aryan peoples sweeping in from the north. But it left its mark so deep in the earth that every archaeologist's spade in Khuzestan still brings it back to light. A civilization is not finished when it falls. It is finished only when it is forgotten. Elam has never been forgotten. Around 1500 BCE, waves of Aryan peoples swept southward from the Central Asian steppes, riding horses, carrying bows, carrying a warrior spirit so fierce that those who saw them trembled. Some traveled to India, others swept into Europe. But a decisive group settled upon the Iranian plateau, as though this ancient land had called them by name across the wind. Two of these tribes would shape the destiny of Iran forever: the Medes in the north, among hard mountains and dense, twisting forests, and the Persians in the south, across the blazing plains of what is now Fars province, under a sun that showed no mercy. For generations, Both peoples lived in the long shadow of Assyria, enduring, waiting, biding their time with extraordinary patience. In 612 BCE, the waiting finally ended. The Medes joined their Babylonian allies, descended on Nineveh, Assyria's proud and terrifying capital, the city that had made entire nations tremble with dread for centuries, and brought it crashing down. The sound of Nineveh's fall echoed across the known world. The earth seemed to shake with the news. The Medes emerged as masters of a vast empire. But this, remarkable as it was only the beginning of the real story. In 559 BCE, a young man of the Achaemenid line rose to power in Persia. His name was Cyrus, son of Cambyses, king of Persia, and grandson of Astyages, king of the Medes. Armed with military genius, political cunning, and something the modern world calls humanity, this man was about to rewrite the course of human history, not only with a sword, but with an idea. Everyone who knew him recognized a figure of extraordinary power and wisdom. But his true greatness lay not in conquest. It lay in what he did after the conquest. He took Media through clever alliances, not rivers of blood. He conquered Lydia, whose king Croesus was the wealthiest man in the world. And even Croesus's legendary gold could not stop him. Then came Babylon itself, the mythical city of brick walls and hanging gardens, of ziggurats and ancient temples, of 3,000 years of accumulated history. Cyrus walked through the gates of Babylon in 539 BCE. What he did next, no conqueror in history had ever done before. He freed the slaves and gave them back their lives. The Jews who had spent 70 years in Babylonian captivity, he sent them home to their own land. He rebuilt the temples of the peoples he had defeated. He honored their languages, their customs, their gods. In the book of Ezra, Cyrus is called the Anointed of the Lord, the first and only non-Jew in all of history to receive that sacred title. The Cyrus cylinder, now housed in the British Museum, is the oldest declaration of human rights on Earth, written 2,500 years before the United Nations Universal Declaration. This man was no legend. He was a documented, undeniable historical reality, and the world still has not fully absorbed what he did. Cyrus laid the foundation. Darius the Great built the empire upon it. Under Darius, the Achaemenid domains stretched from the Indus River in India to Egypt in the west, from the Danube to the Arabian Sea. 50 million people, roughly half the entire population of the known world, lived under one Persian banner. Darius built the Royal Road, 2,700 kilometers of stone-paved highway connecting Sardis in Anatolia to Susa, traveled by couriers so swift that Herodotus marveled and wrote of them. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor night stops them. Words that centuries later would inspire the motto of the United States Postal Service. Darius governed through local satraps, maintained organized taxation, and permitted the peoples under his rule to keep their own languages and customs. They were grateful for it. Persepolis, even in ruins today, it steals the breath from every visitor who stands before it. Its columns still rise defiantly toward the sky. Its bas-reliefs still tell their stories in stone. But every great story carries a shadow. In 334 BCE, a 22-year-old from Macedonia crossed the Hellespont with a passionate army and marched eastward. Alexander of Macedon came to the east, and in 330 BCE, Persepolis burned, perhaps in revenge, perhaps in a moment of drunken fury. 500 years of history turned to ash and cinder. Iran fell, but Iran did not die. That is the deepest and most enduring secret of the civilization. Conquerors came and went, each one certain they had finished it. And each time from within, Iran slowly, quietly turned those very conquerors into Iranians. Alexander himself, before his early death in Babylon, had fallen under the spell of Persian culture. His successors, the Seleucids, gradually took on an Iranian identity. The pattern had been set. The Parthians rose from northeastern Iran in the late 3rd century BCE and held the nation against the full might of Rome for nearly 5 centuries. Their greatest moment came at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE, when Iranian forces annihilated a great Roman army and killed Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. The shock reverberated across the ancient world. Then came the Sasanians, founded by Ardashir I in 224 CE, warriors who were fully conscious of their Achaemenid inheritance and embraced it with fierce pride. For 4 centuries they fought Rome and then Byzantium. They advanced to the gates of Constantinople. They pushed east to the Indus River. They built a civilization of music, architecture, poetry, and philosophy that would later become the beating inspiration for both Islamic and European art. In the 7th century, a storm rose from Arabia. Islam arrived not merely as a religion, but as a total revolution of society and politics. Arab-Muslim armies, burning with faith, swept northward. The Sassanid Empire, bled white by decades of war with Byzantium, could not hold. In 637 CE, at the Battle of Qadisiyah, the Sassanid army shattered. A few years later, the last Sassanid king was killed by a miller in Khorasan as he fled. A 1,000-year empire came to its end. But this is where something truly astonishing unfolded. Iran fell, and yet Iran did not die. Persian speakers accepted Islam with sincerity, but they shaped Islam in their own image. Within barely 2 centuries, the greatest scholars, poets, scientists, and philosophers of the Islamic Golden Age were Iranian. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, was from Bukhara. Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, was from Khwarazm. Ferdowsi, who gave the Persian language its immortal epic, was from Tus. Razi, the father of chemistry and clinical medicine, was from Ray. Iran did not disappear into the empire that conquered it. It became that empire's intellectual soul. In 821 CE, the Tahirid dynasty rose as the first independent Iranian government after the Arab conquest. After them came the Samanids, who did something remarkable. They revived the Persian language, written now in Arabic script, but animated by an unmistakably Iranian soul. Rudaki, the father of Persian poetry, sang at their courts with a voice that still echoes today. Ferdowsi composed the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, a colossal epic of 60,000 verses that preserved the mythology and history of Iran for all time. Written in a Persian so pure that it single-handedly kept the language alive through centuries of foreign rule. From that era to this, Persian literature has stood as one of the most emotionally resonant and spiritually alive literary traditions in the world. It is no accident that Hafiz and Rumi are still read, still loved, still wept over, not just in Iran, but everywhere human hearts beat. But the worst blow was still to come. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan rose from the steppes of Mongolia with an army that was not merely a military force, it was a machine of total destruction. In 1221, the Mongols reached Iran. What followed is among the most devastating chapters in the story of any civilization. Nishapur, a city of over 150,000 people, a jewel of science and culture, was leveled to the ground in days. The Mongols killed even the animals. Merv, Balkh, Bukhara, Herat, all burned and obliterated. The ancient Khanate irrigation systems, built over 1,000 years of labor, were destroyed. Libraries turned to smoke. Scholars were put to the sword. Iran's population fell from perhaps 13 million to fewer than 5 million. And still, Iran did not die. The Mongol rulers who inherited Iran converted to Islam, learned Persian, and became devoted patrons of Iranian art and architecture. The grandsons of the man who had burned Iranian cities rebuilt libraries in those same cities. Iran changed the conqueror, as it always had, as it always would. In 1501, a 14-year-old boy named Ismail Safavi rode out of Ardabil with a sword and an unbreakable will and reunited Iran under one flag for the first time in centuries. He declared Twelver Shia Islam the official faith, a decision that gave Iran a distinct and durable identity between the Sunni Ottoman Empire to the west and the powers to the east. Wars with the Ottomans followed, including a painful defeat at Chaldiran in 1514, but Iran held. Shah Abbas I, the greatest of the Safavid rulers, built Isfahan into a capital that struck European travelers dumb with wonder. Isfahan is half the world. That phrase entered Persian poetry for good reason. Naqshi Jahan Square, the Shah Mosque with its breathtaking turquoise tilework, the Kaju Bridge rising from the river as if born from the water itself. Each one a masterpiece, each one still standing today. The Qajar era that followed brought a new and unfamiliar agony: modern colonialism. Russia pressed from the north, Britain pressed from the south. Two wars with Russia stripped vast territories from Iran's body. The Treaty of Turkmenshay in 1828 was a humiliation from which Iran took generations to recover. Then oil was discovered, foreign eyes fixed upon it with undisguised hunger. Economic concessions bled the country dry. But in that darkness, something fierce and luminous grew. Intellectuals returned from Europe with a radical new vision: law, liberty, parliament. The constitutional revolution of 1905 to 1906 shook the very foundations of power. Bazaar merchants and clergy, secular thinkers and religious scholars, all stood together. A constitution was written. For the first time in Iranian history, the king's power was restrained by law. Iran was walking toward modernity, even if the path was drenched in blood. Reza Khan seized power in 1921, built railways, founded universities, and modernized the country with a firm and often brutal hand. His son Mohammad Reza Shah inherited a modernizing, oil-rich nation and also built a feared secret police force that hunted and tortured those who dissented. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the oil industry and became a national hero. His face appeared on the cover of Time magazine. In 1953, a CIA and British-engineered coup removed him. He spent the rest of his life confined to his home. That wound still bleeds in the memory of Iran. In 1979, revolution arrived. The Islamic Republic was declared. Within a year, Iraq, backed by Western powers, invaded. 8 brutal years of war consumed more than 100,000 young Iranian lives. Iran today is a nation of 85 million people, half of them under 30, young men and women raised on the internet, on global music, on enormous ambitions inside a constrained space. Iran has more female university students than almost any country in its region. Its cinema wins Academy Awards. Asghar Farhadi has stood on that stage twice, with stories drawn from the contradictions and depths of Iranian life. Its poetry still lives and breathes. People still read Hafez, still open his divan at random, and take his verses as guidance, finding in him something that no algorithm, no chatbot, no artificial mind will ever replace. And every spring, every single year without exception, from Tehran to Dushanbe, from Kabul to Istanbul, Iranians gather around the Hafsin table and celebrate Nowruz, the Persian New Year, a festival 2,500 years old. A tradition that no empire, no revolution, no invasion, and no sanction has ever managed to extinguish. It survives because it is not a custom. It is an identity. Cyrus the Great wrote, in the world's first declaration of human rights, "I came for peace, not for war, for freedom, not for chains." Perhaps those words carry the deepest wish of every Iranian across every century of this long and extraordinary story. A longing that has never once stopped beating inside the chest of this nation through every fire, every conquest, every loss, and every rebirth. Iran, with all its wounds and all its wonder, still stands, still breathes, still sings. No conqueror ever truly finished it. No fire ever fully consumed it. Because this civilization lives not in its palaces or its armies, but in the language, in the poetry, in that irreducible feeling of what it means to be Iranian. And that is something no sword has ever been sharp enough to cut,